There is a version of you that has never said what it actually wanted, that has spent years reading the emotional temperature of every room before deciding which version of itself was safe to bring in. That has become so skilled at anticipating what other people need, so finely calibrated to the subtle signals of approval and disapproval, that it can adjust its personality with the smoothness of someone who has been practicing the adjustment for so long they no longer remember there was ever anything to adjust from. And this version of you has been called kind, generous, easy to be around, a good friend, a devoted partner, a reliable person. And every one of those compliments has landed like a quiet confirmation of something you learned so early you cannot remember learning it. That what makes you valuable is not who you are. It is what you do for people. That your worth is not inherent, it is performed. And that the performance must be maintained continuously, carefully, without visible strain. Because the alternative, the discovery that you are not actually as valuable as the performance suggested, is a risk that something very old and very frightened in you has never been willing to take. This is not a character trait. This is not generosity taken too far. What you are about to discover is that what most people call people-pleasing is not primarily a social habit or a personality style. It is a survival response, one that was forged in conditions of genuine psychological risk, often before you were old enough to have any other option. And the reason it has been so difficult to change, despite years of understanding it intellectually, despite every book and conversation and moment of frustrated self-recognition, is that you have been trying to change a behavior while leaving the wound that produced it entirely untouched. Something important needs to be said before we go further, because the word trauma has been both overused and underapplied in ways that can make it difficult to hear clearly. When most people think of trauma, they think of the dramatic, the catastrophic, the obviously terrible, events that no one would dispute as genuinely damaging, and those events produce the trauma that most people imagine when they hear the word. But there is another category of traumatic experience that is quieter, less visible, and in many ways more difficult to recognize and recover from precisely because it leaves no obvious evidence, no single identifiable moment. Just a slow accumulation of experiences that taught a developing nervous system something it should never have been taught. That who you naturally are is not safe to be here. The next realization changes everything, and it requires going to a place most conversations about people-pleasing never reach. Imagine a child, somewhere between 3 and 7 years old enough to have a developing sense of self, old enough to feel emotions with full intensity, old enough to express needs and preferences and authentic reactions to the world, but not yet old enough to understand that what is happening in the environment around them is about the adults in it rather than about them, not yet old enough to separate the message from the messenger. This child expresses something authentic, anger maybe, or a need that inconveniences someone, or an opinion that contradicts the preferred narrative of the household. And what comes back is not what a developing nervous system needs in response to authentic self-expression. What comes back is withdrawal, or irritation, or a subtle but unmistakable cooling of the emotional temperature of the room. Perhaps nothing as obvious as punishment. Perhaps simply the sense that something in the environment shifted in response to what they expressed. And the child's developing brain, which is simultaneously learning about the social world and building the neural architecture that will process all future social experience, registers something critical. being authentic is associated with loss of connection. Performing what is wanted is associated with safety. This is not a thought the child has. It is a neurological update that happens beneath conscious awareness in the most ancient and most powerful part of the developing brain's social processing system, and it begins to shape behavior immediately, automatically, and in ways that become more entrenched with each repetition of the original experience. Carl Jung understood this dynamic with unusual clarity, though he described it through a different conceptual framework. His concept of the persona, the social mask, constructed in early life to mediate between the authentic self and the demands of the environment, was always understood by Jung as a necessary development. Every human being needs some capacity to present different aspects of themselves in different social contexts. The persona becomes pathological not when it exists, but when it becomes so dominant, so thoroughly substituted for the authentic self, that the person wearing it has lost reliable access to who they are beneath it. The people pleaser, in Jungian terms, has often built a persona so comprehensive and so compulsively maintained that the authentic self, with all its needs and preferences and genuine emotional responses, has been relocated to the shadow, to the repository of everything that was taught to stay hidden. And what lives in the shadow of the people pleaser is not, in most cases, what they fear it is. They often imagine, in the rare moments they allow themselves to contemplate it, that what they have been suppressing is something dangerous or selfish or fundamentally unacceptable. Something that would confirm the early verdict that their authentic self was too much, not enough, or otherwise unsuitable for the social environment that required their constant performance. But what Jung consistently found in his clinical work, and what contemporary trauma-informed psychology has extensively confirmed, is that what lives in the shadow of the compulsive people pleaser is usually something much simpler and much more human than that. Genuine need, appropriate anger, legitimate preference, the ordinary emotional content of a person who has simply never been given a safe environment in which to exist. But something even more dangerous is happening in the nervous system of the person who learned people-pleasing as a survival strategy. And this is the layer that most intellectual understanding of the pattern never reaches. Think about the last time you were in a social situation where you sensed, correctly or not, that someone was displeased with you. Notice what happened in your body before your mind had time to process the situation consciously. The slight tightening of the chest, the subtle but unmistakable shift in your nervous system's activation level, the automatic redirection of your attention toward the potentially displeased person and away from whatever you had been focused on before. This is not a psychological response, not primarily. This is a physiological one, and it is happening in the most ancient part of your brain, the part that predates language and conscious reasoning and did not arrive in the world already knowing that the current social situation is not actually a survival threat. Neuroscience has mapped this with considerable precision. The brain does not distinguish, at the level of the stress response, between physical danger and social exclusion. Both activate the same threat detection system in the amygdala. Both produce the same cascade of physiological changes that prepare the organism to respond to danger. And for the person whose nervous system was calibrated in an environment where social disapproval was associated with real consequences, the sensitivity of this system to social threat signals is significantly elevated above the baseline, which means that the people pleaser is not simply being overly sensitive in a way they could simply choose to stop. They are responding to social situations with a nervous system that was tuned in early life and through repeated experience to treat disapproval as a genuine emergency. This is the physiological foundation of people-pleasing that almost no one discusses when they talk about learning to set boundaries or stop seeking approval. The behavior is not primarily a cognitive choice that can be changed by thinking differently about it. It is a nervous system response that was installed before the cognitive apparatus was developed enough to evaluate it critically. And changing it requires something that goes considerably deeper than understanding why it is happening. Alfred Adler's framework adds a crucial dimension here. Adler understood that the fundamental human drive toward belonging, toward being an accepted and valued member of the social group, is not a weakness or an immature dependency. It is a genuine and important human need with deep evolutionary roots. For most of human evolutionary history, belonging to the group was not a social preference. It was a survival necessity. The individual excluded from the group did not survive, and the nervous system that evolved in that environment did not develop a nuanced capacity to distinguish between different degrees of social threat. Disapproval was disapproval, and the response to it needed to be immediate and effective. The people pleaser, in Adlerian terms, is someone whose early experience taught them that their natural self was incompatible with belonging, and who has therefore spent their life managing the presentation of self in whatever ways seem most likely to secure the belonging that their nervous system is correctly identifying as essential to psychological survival. The problem is not that they want to belong. The problem is that they learned, in an environment that was not their fault, that belonging required the suppression of the very self that deserved to belong. Most people never notice what comes next, and it is the layer that changes the entire trajectory of recovery. Watch closely what happens when a person who has built their psychological world around people-pleasing encounters genuine acceptance, not the conditional acceptance that their survival strategy was designed to secure, the kind of acceptance that is not contingent on performance or accommodation or the careful management of authentic self-expression, the kind of acceptance that says, I see you, not just the version of you that is trying to be acceptable, but the actual you beneath the performance. And that version is not only tolerable, but genuinely worth being with. Most people pleasers encounter this and do not trust it, not because they are incapable of trust in the abstract, but because the part of them that would need to receive this kind of acceptance, the authentic self that has been in hiding for so long, does not quite believe it is safe to emerge for long enough to be seen. The performance is so habitual, so thoroughly automatic, that the question of what the authentic self actually is has become genuinely difficult to answer. Years of asking, what does this person need from me, have eroded the capacity to ask, what do I actually feel right now? Years of scanning the social environment for signals about what is wanted have dulled the sensitivity to the internal signals about what is true. This is the particular and profound cost of people-pleasing that is almost never included in the conventional account of it. Not just the external cost of relationships organized around performance, or the energy cost of maintaining the performance continuously, or even the health cost of the physiological stress of perpetual social vigilance. The deepest cost is the loss of reliable access to yourself, the gradual erosion of the capacity to know, without external reference, who you are and what you genuinely want and feel and need. Viktor Frankl's understanding of authentic existence becomes essential here. Frankl believed that genuine psychological health requires not just the absence of pathology, but the presence of something specific. The freedom to live in alignment with one's genuine values and genuine experience rather than the demands of external authority. For the people pleaser, this freedom has not been available. Not because of a conscious choice, because the early environment taught them that external authority, specifically the emotional states of the people around them, had to be managed before any attention could be given to internal authority. The external always came first. And when external always comes first, internal eventually stops presenting itself for consideration. The recovery from this, and there is genuine recovery available, is not what most people expect when they first hear that people-pleasing is rooted in trauma. It does not look like learning to be more assertive. It does not look like practicing saying no in a mirror. These things may eventually have their place, but they are downstream of something considerably more fundamental. The recovery begins with something that sounds almost too simple to take seriously, and that is, in practice, one of the most genuinely difficult things a person who has been people-pleasing since childhood will ever attempt. The recovery begins with learning to notice what you actually feel, not what you should feel, not what is reasonable to feel given the circumstances, not what would be convenient to feel given the social situation, what you actually feel right now, in this body, in this moment, before the suppression has had a chance to run. This is the first contact with the self that has been in hiding, and it is not dramatic. It is not the sudden emergence of a fully formed, authentic identity. It is simply the noticing, the willingness to pause long enough to register that there is an interior experience happening and that it belongs to you and that it is worth acknowledging even if, especially if, no one else needs you to have it. Epictetus understood something about this that is quietly relevant even from across the vast distance of his philosophical context. He taught that the beginning of wisdom is distinguishing between what belongs to us and what does not. For the people pleaser, this distinction has been fundamentally confused for most of their life. Other people's emotional states have been treated as their responsibility. Other people's comfort has been treated as their obligation. Other people's approval has been treated as the measure of their worth, and their own feelings, their own needs, their own authentic responses to experience have been treated as things that belong somewhere further down the list after everyone else's have been attended to, which means never. The recovery is the gradual reversal of this confusion, the slowly developing capacity to notice that what belongs to you, your own inner life, your own genuine experience, your own authentic response to being alive, is not selfish or dangerous or incompatible with genuine care for others. It is the prerequisite for all of it, because you cannot offer genuine presence to another person from behind a performance. You can offer management. You can offer careful accommodation, but the actual contact that makes human connection meaningful, the meeting of one real person with another real person, requires both people to actually be there. And the person who has been people-pleasing for their entire life is not fully there. Part of them is always monitoring, always adjusting, always somewhere between what is genuine and what is acceptable. Seneca wrote about the tragedy of the life lived in service of other people's opinions. He was not describing something unusual or pathological. He was describing something he observed in most people around him. The continuous sacrifice of authentic existence in the service of what others thought, wanted, or expected. And he identified the cost of this, not in terms of the obvious external sacrifices it requires, but in terms of something more fundamental, the loss of the relationship with oneself that is the only stable foundation any human life can have. This is the hidden trauma behind people-pleasing that the title of this exploration points toward. Not hidden in the sense of being secret or unknown. Hidden in the sense that its most significant effects are not in the external behavior that others observe and sometimes benefit from. They are in the interior life of the person doing it, in the quiet, persistent absence of self that accumulates over years of always being whatever the situation seemed to require. In the strange and disorienting experience of being praised for your generosity while feeling, somewhere beneath the praise, that the person being praised is not quite the person you actually are. The trauma is real. The adaptation to it was intelligent and, in its original context, genuinely necessary, and the path forward is not the erasure of the caring relational. Genuinely considerate qualities that the adaptation also produced. It is the recovery of the self that those qualities can finally, for the first time, be offered from. Freely, without the terror that something essential will be lost if the performance stops. Without the vigilance. Without the monitoring. With the gradually developing confidence that genuine care, offered from a genuine self, is not only safe, but is infinitely more valuable to everyone involved than the most skillfully maintained performance ever could be. Here is the question that does not resolve quickly, that tends to reveal something important about exactly where in this territory a person is. Not a question about what you do for others, a question about what you permit yourself to receive. When someone offers you acceptance, not for what you do, but for who you are, in the moments when you are not performing, not accommodating, not being useful, just simply being whatever you actually are in that moment, what happens inside you? Do you receive it? Or does something old and frightened move to earn it before it can land? If this kind of psychological depth resonates with you, the kind that goes beneath the surface and reaches the places where genuine self-understanding lives, consider subscribing. This channel is built for people who are willing to look honestly at their own interior world, and there is much more of this kind of exploration ahead.